when the working class parties of Germany and France voted for the war. Previously, those who were for socialism and the triumph of the masses were called Social Democrats. Subsequently, with Lenin leading the way, the truly committed would come to have a distinctive name, the Communists. And, though reluctantly, Lenin departed from Marx on the role of the peasantry in the revolution. This was an intensely practical matter. Lenin was a Russian. Russia was an agricultural country. In 1890, when Lenin was coming first to the ideas of Marx, there were only about 2.5 million industrial workers in all of the Russian Empire. To wait for capitalism and then for the seizure of power by the resulting proletariat would be to wait forever. In Russia, some peasants had land, but most wanted more. They believed that the land of the landlords belonged by ancient right to them. Marx would first have had capitalism rescue these peasants from the idiocy of rural life, his phrase. Lenin thought it far more practical to promise them the land, and this he did. All this was still in the future. The August guns brought more practical problems for Lenin in the form of the police. Previously, he'd been a pleasant thorn in the side of the Tsar. Now, conceivably, he was a Russian patriot, maybe a spy. He was arrested, and the arresting officers came here, and along with Lenin, they seized notebooks containing several columns of figures. Perhaps the figures were codes, although in fact they were agricultural statistics. An accompanying official made fun of the whole proceedings. He suggested to the police that maybe a jar of paste that they found here in Lenin's rooms was a bomb. Austria-Hungary, it had long been said, was a despotism tempered by carelessness, or maybe casualness. There was some indication in these proceedings of the truth of that saying. After a relatively short stay in jail, Lenin and his family were allowed to go to Switzerland, a country where from earlier years of exile they could feel reasonably at home. Meanwhile, peasants and men of all the diverse and dissident races were given arms, mobilized into the imperial armies. One thinks of this now as an act of supreme stupidity. Where might those guns be turned if things got out of hand? Stupidity is not a negligible force in human affairs, a proposition in which all with any experience in military matters will agree. And it was an especially powerful force in World War I. Military position, like political power, was hereditary. Generals were selected for reasons of family, age, military style, or horsemanship, and not for intelligence. As happens more often than we imagine, the intelligent man was known to ask questions, make a nuisance of himself. So brains were a positive disqualification. Meanwhile, developments from before World War I had posed for the generals a problem far beyond their mental reach. By 1914, military technology had advanced greatly in small arms ordnance. This was cheap and easy engineering, and its most notable product was the machine gun. One such gun well emplaced was the equal of 100 or more men advancing with rifles. To the machine gun, the old generals of the old system had only one basic answer. Send ever-increasing numbers of men against the guns after an ever heavier artillery bombardment. The machine guns, enough of them, invariably survived the bombardment. And the men who then advanced did not. The political leaders in their turn could think of nothing better than to trust the generals. Out of this combination of simple circumstances and simple minds came the great test of the system. The real revolutionaries were the generals in France and on the Eastern Front. By contrast, the admitted revolutionary, now in Switzerland, was leading a very sedentary scholarly life. Lenin in Bern was reading, writing, lecturing, and waiting. Money was scarce, although some came to him from his family and friends in Russia. Such things were not so well controlled in that war as they were later. He was not without companions. Switzerland in the 20 years before the Russian Revolution was, again by modern standards, an unbelievably liberal and tolerant place. It's possible that it harbored more Russian revolutionaries than Russia itself. Certainly those in Switzerland were more influential, and because they stayed up all night arguing, landladies charged them extra. Krupskaya told of Lenin's work.
Ilyich ardently devoted himself to the mobilization of the forces for the struggle on the international front. It does not matter that we now number only a few individuals, he once remarked. Millions will be with us. We lived in Bern on Distelweg, a small, tidy, quiet street adjoining the Bern forest. Sometimes we would sit and talk for hours while Ilyich jotted down outlines of his speeches and articles and polished his formulations.
While the generals did his work in France and Russia, Lenin even had time for more holidays. He went to the mountains, as he had before in Poland, and found to his pleasure that the Swiss librarians were glad to mail him the books he needed.
One sent a postcard to the library with one's address and a request to send the book required. No questions asked, no certificates, no guarantees that one would not cheat the library out of the book, a complete contrast to bureaucratic France. This arrangement enabled Ilyich to work in this out-of-the-way place. Ilyich had nothing but praise for Swiss culture.
But Lenin could not content himself with a passive, bookish life, even though the generals and the old ruling classes might be doing his work for him on the fronts. Some kind of direct revolutionary action was called for. The weapons of the revolutionaries were two: the pamphlet or tract and the conference. The most famous of the wartime conferences was held here at Zimmerwald, now just a few minutes from Bern, and the conferees took their meals in this cafe, which was then very much as it is now. Every new development required a conference. Nothing could be accomplished without a conference, and after a conference, anything was possible. Not even the modern sales executive is more committed to the conference as a way of life than were Lenin and his colleagues. The actual meetings of the conferees of the revolutionaries were held not here in this cafe, but up the hill, a few